The Story of Ip Man. Hong Kong was heavy that day. The air hung thick and humid, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Down on the streets of 1969, the markets roared with life. The sharp calls of vendors, the rhythmic clack of cleavers against wooden blocks, the mingled scents of fresh fish, steamed buns, and cheap tobacco drifting in the heat. But inside a small upstairs room in an old building, there was only silence. Only the soft, rhythmic tapping of wooden arms and the steady, controlled breathing of an old man. He sat on a plain wooden chair, thin frame, sharp features, eyes both tired and sharp. His hands rested lightly, almost casually, against the arms of a wooden Wing Chun dummy, the surface darkened by decades of strikes. Each movement he made was slow, deliberate, as if time itself had no claim over him. But beneath that stillness was something unmistakable, the weight of decades, of mastery earned in sweat and hardship. His name was Ip Man. A quiet knock at the door. A young student, barely in his 20s, stepped inside and bowed. "Sifu," he said softly, "we've had more challenges." The master looked up. He knew this city would always have men who wanted to test themselves, to prove their style was better. But Ip Man no longer fought for pride, for trophies, or for crowds. The art he taught was not for performance, it was for survival, for dignity, for knowing you could stand your ground when the world pressed against you. The path to this room had been long. Once Ip Man had lived in Foshan, in a wealthy home guarded by carved stone lions. He was the son of a privileged family, destined for a comfortable, uneventful life. But instead of taking the easy road, he stepped into a world of discipline, bruises, and lessons that would cost him dearly. He remembered the smell of that old courtyard in Foshan, the first time he met his teacher. The push of an older student's palm against his chest, knocking him out of stance again and again until his legs trembled. Back then he had no idea that those small stinging lessons were nothing compared to the trials life had prepared for him. He would endure the Japanese occupation, starvation, and the loss of everything he owned. He would refuse to serve the invaders, even when it meant walking the harder road. Eventually, he would arrive in Hong Kong alone. No wealth, no family, no safety net. But he still had the one thing no one could take away from him, the art of Wing Chun, and the unshakable belief that true strength was not just the ability to strike, but the ability to remain unbroken. Now, in this cramped little room, he passed that art on to those willing to listen. Workers, students, young men hungry for confidence. Among them was one who would one day change the world of martial arts forever, though no one knew it yet. Ip Man never thought himself as a hero. He was simply a man who spent his life doing what he believed was right, and that, more than anything else, is why his name became legend.
Part 1. Childhood in Foshan. Long before he became the calm, sharp-eyed master in Hong Kong, Ip Man was just a boy running through the streets of Foshan. The Foshan of the early 1900s was not yet the crowded, modern city it would one day become. It was a blend of old traditions and new influences, narrow stone-paved streets lined with tea houses, silk shops, and herbal medicine stalls. Rickshaws rattled past on wooden wheels, carrying merchants, scholars, and wealthy families in fine robes. Ip Man was born into one of those wealthy families in 1893. His father, Ip Oidor was a respected businessman, and the family lived in a spacious home with carved wooden screens, stone lions at the entrance, and a large courtyard where sunlight filtered through bamboo leaves. Servants tended the household, and Ip Man grew up with all the privileges that money could provide: fine clothes, access to schooling, and never worrying about the next meal. But Foshan was also a place where martial arts thrived. In the tea houses, older men told stories of heroes who could defeat 10 attackers with a single movement. Children would gather around street performers demonstrating sword forms or acrobatics, eyes wide with wonder. And for young Ip Man, martial arts was not just a pastime, it was a calling. At the age of 12, he began learning Wing Chun from Chan Hua Shun, a man known as Money Changer Hua, because of his work in a currency exchange shop. Chan was already in his 60s, with a weathered face, a strong frame, and hands that moved like lightning despite his age. The training was simple but strict: long hours of stance work, repetitive drills, and the constant reminder that Wing Chun was about efficiency, precision, and control. For a boy from a wealthy family, the training was a shock. There were no silk robes here, no gentle words of encouragement. Chan's methods were direct. If your stance was weak, he would push you until you fell. If your strikes lacked structure, he would block and counter so fast you couldn't even see his hands. The wooden dummy became both enemy and friend, its cold, unyielding arms teaching him to redirect force instead of meeting it head-on. Chan Hua Shun passed away just 3 years later, but before he did, he entrusted Ip Man to another of his senior students, Ng Sheng Shak. Under Ng's guidance, Ip Man's skills began to grow. He learned to keep his center, to read an opponent's intentions through the smallest shift in their weight, to strike only when it was necessary, and when it was necessary, to strike decisively. By the time he was 16, Ip Man left Foshan for Hong Kong to attend St. Stephen's College, an elite school for wealthy families. Hong Kong was a different world: British colonial architecture, electric trams, bustling ports filled with foreign ships, and it was here that fate led him to one of the most important encounters of his life. One afternoon, he witnessed a fellow student being bullied by an older man. Stepping in, Ip Man used his Wing Chun training to subdue the aggressor quickly and decisively. Impressed, a bystander approached him and asked where he had learned his skills. When he told him, the man smiled and said, "Come with me. There is someone you should meet." That someone was Leong Bick, the son of Leong John, one of the most famous Wing Chun masters in history. Leong Bick's approach to Wing Chun was different from Chan Hua Shun's. Where Chan had emphasized power and structure, Leong Bick focused on strategy, adaptability, and using an opponent's force against them in more subtle ways. Under his guidance, Ip Man's technique evolved. He became faster, more precise, and more tactically minded, learning to think 2 or 3 moves ahead during a fight. By the time he returned to Foshan in his late teens, Ip Man was no longer just a wealthy young man dabbling in martial arts. He was a skilled practitioner with a deep understanding of Wing Chun's principles, a foundation that would carry him through the turbulent years ahead.
Part 2: Foshan, War, and the Fall of a Master. When Ip Man returned to Foshan after his studies in Hong Kong, the city seemed smaller, almost too quiet compared to the bustling colonial streets he had left behind. But it was still home. The familiar smell of incense from the temples, the sound of clinking porcelain in tea houses, the rhythm of bamboo poles beating dough in the bakeries. He was now in his early 20s, well-dressed, confident, and carrying himself with the quiet composure of someone who had mastered not just a skill, but a way of life. Ip Man didn't open a martial arts school immediately. In those days, martial arts were not a profession for the wealthy. They were a personal pursuit, a way to refine oneself. His reputation began to spread quietly, not through advertisements or boasts, but through the whispers of those who had crossed hands with him and found themselves outmatched. In Foshan's martial circles, challenges were common. Rival styles would test each other in private matches. No crowds, no showmanship, just skill against skill. Ip Man fought in many such encounters, defeating opponents from different systems. His style was economical, his movements minimal, his strikes devastatingly accurate. Word spread. There is a young Wing Chun man who is unbeatable. But the peace of those days was fragile. By 1937, the shadow of war loomed over China as Japanese forces advanced. In 1938, they entered Foshan. The occupation changed everything. The bustling markets grew quiet. The tea houses became places of tense whispers, and soldiers patrolled the streets with cold eyes. For Ip Man, life took a drastic turn. The Japanese, having heard of his martial skill, wanted him to teach their soldiers. He refused. His refusal came at a price. His family's wealth was stripped away. His properties were seized, and he was forced to leave his home. Once a man of status, he now found himself with nothing. To survive, Ip Man taught Wing Chun quietly to a small group of students. The lessons were held in borrowed rooms, dimly lit, where the sound of strikes against wooden dummies echoed like muffled drums. Food was scarce. Some days the meals consisted of nothing more than rice porridge. Yet in those years, his students learned more than just techniques. They saw resilience, dignity, and the refusal to bend to oppression. One story from this period tells of a Japanese officer who challenged Ip Man after hearing of his skill. The match was short. Ip Man's precision and control left the officer humiliated, but alive, a testament to his discipline. In a time when anger could easily turn to violence, he still embodied restraint. By 1945, the war ended, but Foshan was not the same. The political landscape shifted as the Chinese Civil War brought new uncertainty. In 1949, when the Communist Party took control, private martial arts schools faced increasing restrictions. For a man like Ip Man, who had no political ties but valued personal freedom, the environment became suffocating. That same year, he made a decision that would change not just his life, but the course of martial arts history. He left Foshan to Hong Kong. He carried little with him, no wealth, no property, just his knowledge, his skill, and his unshakable belief in the art of Wing Chun.
Part 3. Hong Kong, Bruce Lee, and the Legacy in Motion. When Ip Man stepped off the ferry in Hong Kong in 1949, he wasn't the wealthy gentleman from Foshan anymore. He was a refugee, one of thousands fleeing political upheaval on the mainland. Hong Kong itself was crowded, noisy, and chaotic. British colonial buildings rose alongside crammed tenements. Neon lights flickered above food stalls, and the air was thick with the smell of street noodles, coal smoke, and the salty harbor breeze. He had no home, no money, and no plan, except for one unshakable thing: Wing Chun. In those early years, Ip Man's circumstances were as humble as they had ever been. He stayed in boarding houses, sometimes sleeping on hard wooden beds in cramped rooms shared with strangers. Jobs were scarce, but in Hong Kong's working-class neighborhoods, martial arts still held value, not as a hobby, but as a tool for survival. Street fights were common, and gangs prowled the alleys. In 1950, a student named Luyang Shang invited Ip Man to teach at the Restaurant Workers Union Hall. It was here that his life began to change. The school was nothing glamorous, just an empty room above a busy street, the floor often dusty, the summer air stifling. But it was enough. His first students were not rich gentlemen like in Foshan. They were laborers, waiters, dock workers, men who came in with bruised knuckles and hard stares, hoping to learn something that could help them survive. Ip Man adapted his teaching. He broke down Wing Chun into clear, efficient steps that even men with no prior training could master. His lessons were short on philosophy, long on practicality, economy of motion, simultaneous attack and defense, staying relaxed under pressure. Word spread, and soon more students came, some out of curiosity, others drawn by the rumors that his style could stop any opponent. By the late 1950s, Ip Man's name in Hong Kong's martial world was secure, but his most famous student was yet to walk through his door. In 1953, a 13-year-old boy named Bruce Lee entered Ip Man's school. Bruce was small, wiry, and full of restless energy. He was also getting into trouble, street fights, schoolyard brawls, and needed direction. Wing Chun gave him focus. Ip Man saw potential in Bruce, but also a challenge. The boy's mixed heritage sometimes made him a target of prejudice, even among fellow students. Yet Bruce persisted, training in the wooden dummy forms, chi sao, sticky hands, and close-range strikes. Though Bruce Lee never became a full master of Wing Chun before leaving for America, his time with Ip Man left a permanent mark. The principles of economy, directness, and adaptability became part of Bruce's later Jeet Kune Do philosophy. Through the 1960s, Ip Man continued teaching, moving his school several times and shaping a generation of Wing Chun practitioners. His students spread across Hong Kong and eventually the world. By the time the martial arts boom hit the West, fueled in part by Bruce Lee's movies, the quiet, reserved master from Foshan was recognized as one of the most influential figures in martial history. In his later years, Ip Man lived modestly, never seeking fame or wealth. He recorded the Wing Chun forms on film to preserve them for future generations. Even as his health declined from throat cancer, he continued to teach, refining movements with the same calm precision he had carried his entire life. On December 2, 1972, Ip Man passed away at the age of 79. He left behind not just a style, but a living legacy, one carried forward by his students and immortalized by the global spread of Wing Chun. His journey, from privilege to poverty, from local master to international icon, stood as proof of resilience, discipline, and the quiet power of refusing to give up.
Final part, the lesson of Ip Man's life. When we talk about martial arts legends, it's easy to get lost in the choreography, the graceful hand techniques, the lightning-quick strikes, the elegance of forms. But Ip Man's real legacy was never just about fighting, it was about living. Think about it. Here was a man born into comfort, whose early life was wrapped in privilege. Then history tore it all away. He lost his home, his wealth, his security. Twice he had to start over, stripped of almost everything. First when war consumed China, and again when he fled to Hong Kong with nothing in his pockets. For many, that would have been the end of the story. We all know people who, after losing once, never fully rise again. But Ip Man didn't just rise, he rebuilt. Quietly, methodically, with no guarantees of success. He didn't wait for the right time. He didn't wait for someone to rescue him. He began with what he had, where he was. And maybe that's the lesson we forget most often. You don't need perfect conditions to start. You just need the will to take the first step. Teaching Wing Chun in a cramped union hall to working-class men wasn't glamorous. It didn't make him rich, but it kept the art alive. and it gave him purpose. Purpose that would one day ripple across the world, touching millions, many of whom have never even stepped into a kung fu school, but still know the name Ip Man. And here's the deeper truth. His greatest student, Bruce Lee, wouldn't have been Bruce Lee without Ip Man. Without that quiet man in the corner of a hot Hong Kong room correcting his stance. Without the lessons in economy of motion and mental focus, Bruce might have remained just another street kid looking for trouble. Ip Man's story is proof that influence doesn't always look like power. Sometimes it's the quiet consistency, the choice to keep showing up, that changes everything. So maybe you're sitting there thinking about a dream you've put off. Maybe you've been waiting for the right circumstances or for someone to notice you and give you your shot. Stop waiting. No one is coming to save you. The only person who can start is you. When life strips you down to nothing, and it will at some point, you have two choices: wait for rescue or start building. Ip Man chose to build. That's why his story isn't just martial arts history, it's human history. It's the reminder that strength isn't about how hard you can hit, but about how quietly you can keep going, even when no one's watching. And if you take anything from his life, let it be this: start now with what you have, where you are. Don't wait for perfect. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for rescue. Because the truth is, no one is coming to save you. But if you begin today, maybe years from now, someone will tell their story and say, "It all started because of you."